United we play, united we win.
Deep right field, another absolute bomb over the flag court.
We are family.
Outstanding effort again.
We're busting ours to kick yours.
That's big time.
-15.
Respect all, fear none.
Oh, did he belt that one?
Intensity is not a perfume.
It was a no-doubter.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
We are up in the bird's nest here at Oriole Park at Camden Yards. I'm Brendan Mortensen alongside Annie Klaff. We have been pushed across the hall because apparently making sure that the Orioles game is on TV is more important than our podcast, which is a little bit weird, but we're still here. We're still going to get our Orioles chat on here. Annie, I want to start with a question for you before we get into this show. There was no softball this week, so you don't have to be subjected to that softball update because it didn't happen. I'm going to read out a starting rotation for you, and I want you to give a guesstimate as to where this would rank in baseball. Grayson Rodriguez, Kyle Bradish, Zach Eflin, John Means, and Tyler Wells. Where does that 5-man starting rotation rank in baseball for you? Just a rough guess.
I would say first.
You'd say first?
Yeah, if they were all healthy and doing just fine.
Yeah, I think it's right up there. They're all injured. Every single one of them. I wanted to go one single podcast. We had a whole plan. If you've noticed the title on today's YouTube page, it has nothing to do with starting pitcher injuries. It is hey, how do the Orioles stack up against the other top teams in baseball? I didn't even change the title out of solidarity because I wanted to go one singular week without talking about a starting pitcher getting injured for the Baltimore Orioles. And here we are.
That would have been too good to be true, Brendan.
Would it have?
Yeah.
1 week without a starting pitcher getting injured.
And even saying too good to be true, that's just like not also because it hasn't been good at all. Just given how many people have been injured this season. But yeah, it is really another tough blow. Another week, another injury is the name of the game these days.
I guess so. And I guess that should have been the name of the podcast outside of how do the Orioles stack up against the other good teams in baseball. But we unfortunately
we'll get to
have
that
to
too.
start. We'll get to that. We'll still talk to that. But we have to start with Zach Eflin landing on the injured list with inflammation in his right shoulder. As I mentioned, this now makes 5 Orioles starting pitchers on the injured list. Grayson Rodriguez and Zach Eflin. The Orioles are hopeful that they will get them back in September. Kyle Bradish, John Means, Tyler Wells, those 3 are out for the season and most likely a chunk of 2025. And then you add in the fact that there are 3 bullpen arms also on the injured list, and Felix Bautista, who is done for the year, Danny Coulombe and Jacob Webb. Those guys you're hoping you get back in September as well. But getting back to Eflin, Brandon Hyde said that this is hopefully just a short-term injury. He is, quote, optimistic that he's not going to miss much more time after the injured list, and, quote, hopefully he'll be back in September. Stop me if you've heard that one before about a significant Orioles injury over the last few weeks. Zach Eflin had been outstanding in his stint in Baltimore. The Orioles got him from the Rays at the trade deadline, and all he did in his 4 starts in an Orioles uniform, 4 quality starts, 4-0, a 2.13 ERA, 25 strikeouts, 2 walks. He was even better than advertised in an Orioles uniform, and now he's on the injured list, just like everybody else.
It's almost comical at this point. I mean, it's not, obviously.
It's certainly not
really
funny.
Kind of depressing, but it is comical when you think about it. It's like, okay, you just get over one injury, kind of getting over it, but okay, Grayson Rodriguez, that was the news. And then you have Albert Suarez, who had an incredible start, and he's been the one who's kind of bounced back for the Orioles when they need it. But then you get this news, and luckily Dean Kramer had a fantastic start last night. So it is that next man up mentality, and it's been going well so far, but let's just hope that it can keep going well so far and not go any further. I mean, you said yesterday that if Albert Suarez had to get Tommy John out of solidarity, you would also
yes.
get Tommy John
I would.
surgery.
If it was necessary, because I am such an Albert Suarez fan, I would.
Get Big Al tattooed on your arm.
Yeah, exactly. I know it's a next man up mentality, but you're running out of men.
I know.
I mean, it's ridiculous. There's 5 starting pitchers at the big league level who are on the injured list. You can count 6 if you want to add Chase McDermott into that mix. He's on the injured list for AAA Norfolk. I know he hasn't been a consistent contributor at the big league level, but he was at the very least a starting option here. And so now, again, you're looking at the starting rotation, and it's the same conversation of what the heck do you do to tread water until Zach Eflin and Grayson Rodriguez come back. You don't even want to start to have the conversation of what happens if Zach Eflin and Grayson Rodriguez don't land on the optimistic side of their injury outlook. We are hopeful that they are going to be back in September. We haven't heard anything to the contrary of that. So until we hear differently, we're going to keep our fingers crossed that they are back at some point in September. We're doing the same thing with Jordan Westberg and Danny Gulom and Jacob Webb. But looking at the starting rotation, Corbin Burns, last one standing, again. I talked about it last week, but I don't know where you are without Corbin Burns. I know he's been shaky in his last few starts. It's Corbin Burns. He's allowed to have one bad start in an entire season. I think we just got used to Corbin Burns being so otherworldly that having back-to-back starts where he doesn't look absolutely unbelievable is shocking, but pitchers are allowed to do that. And then you've got Dean Kramer behind him, who, as you mentioned, has looked really solid in his last few outings. After those two guys, I mean, it's Albert Suarez. You're going to keep riding that train until it falls off the tracks because he's been awesome.
Don't put that into the universe.
No, I mean, look, we know what happened with Albert Suarez when he was starting a bunch of games. It seems like he lost track a little bit, bounced into the bullpen. He's going to be solid somewhere. As of right now, he's solid in the starting rotation. After that, it's Trevor Rogers. Cole Irvin is getting a start this afternoon. It's a lot of question marks after Corbin Burns and Dean Kramer. And I think it gets you to at least a competitive place in September, where hopefully you've got Zach Eflin and Grayson Rodriguez back down the stretch. But you definitely don't feel good about the starting rotation as of right now. And there's nothing that could have been done to make you feel good about this. I saw someone on Twitter yesterday commenting about the fact that Michael Elias didn't do enough to get this starting rotation. What do you want him to do?
Yeah, there's
there's
nothing
5
you
guys
can do.
out. Yeah.
And especially when it would have been such a good starting rotation had all gone to plan and all gone well. Like you had said, literally right off the start of this podcast, is that if that could have been the starting rotation, it easily could have been the top starting rotation in all of baseball. But I do want to look at Cole Irvin, who is kind of getting that second chance again back in the big leagues, who definitely has struggled in the last however many outings he had before going down to AAA. And so you kind of just hope that he reaches back, because he did have some quality starts in the beginning of the season, later May, kind of reaching into June. So you kind of hope that he gets back to then. Maybe some lower leverage situations in AAA will kind of get him more healthy, get him back in the zone, and you really hope for that, because he is someone you will be counting on top of that Dean Kramer, Trevor Rogers, and, of course, Albert Suarez. Yeah,
Irvin, as you mentioned, was really solid as a starter at the beginning of the season when the Orioles were, again, dealing with a bunch of unexpected injuries. This was when you were talking about John Means, and you were without Kyle Bradish at the beginning of the year. Cole Irvin was in that rotation. He looked really solid. Irvin has a 7.91 ERA as a reliever this season, but as a starting pitcher, the ERA is just over 4. An ERA just over 4 as a starting pitcher isn't a front-line guy, but with where the Orioles stand right now, you will take an ERA just over 4 out of a number 4, number 5 type of starter, because at this point, you just really need innings. I mean, there's a lot of bullpen arms that you can shuffle through. We've seen some new ones at the big league level. Dylan Tate was here for a little bit before getting optioned back down to AAA Norfolk. Colin Selby looked really good in his outing. So there are bullpen arms that you can shuffle through, but you really just hope that guys like Irvin and Rogers, even if they're not giving you the 7-6 innings of 2 or 3 run ball, if they can keep you in games, if they can give you 5 innings, 3 earned runs, get it to the bullpen, and at least keep the game manageable, where if your offense is scoring 4 or 5 runs a game, Rogers and Irvin are keeping you in it, that's really all you can ask for out of those guys at that point. I know you would like for higher upside there, but at this point, you're trying to find innings. You are trying to keep playing competitive baseball until we get to a point in September where all of a sudden you have a bunch of all-stars back. You have Zach Eflin back, who was top 6 in AL Cy Young voting last year. Grayson Rodriguez, who has looked like one of the better pitchers in the American League this season. You just need innings to get back to that point, which is a hard thing to say because you want higher upside there, but you're not looking for elite level production out of guys like Rogers and Irvin. You're just looking for them to be solid. Yeah. And if they can be solid for a month, you feel good in September.
Yeah, and it's like September can't come soon enough.
Yeah.
When you're looking forward to those guys who are projected to even come then, like you said a little bit before, but just kind of making sure that all goes according to plan. But I also did want to mention it was definitely a bullpen night last night in the win against the Mets. Craig Kimbrell had a pleasant surprise there where he didn't blow it, and he no earned runs last night, so that was a really good sign to see from him. I know it's only one outing out of many in August, so you just kind of hope that he's getting more towards the way he was, where he went 21 outings with not a single earned run.
Yeah, Craig Kimbrell, again, we know that he is very streaky. That is how he has been throughout the course of his career. You are hoping that you can get Kimbrell back to a point in late August here, in September, where he just gets on a hot stretch, right? We saw it last year in Philly where, unfortunately, the cold stretch for Kimbrell just came in September, and it came in October, which is when you don't want that cold stretch to happen. So Craig Kimbrell, you hope that he's at least an option moving forward, right? The tone from Brandon Hyde and the back end of this bullpen has shifted a little bit, where midseason, even when Kimbrell was going through some struggles, it was, hey, this is our closer. He's going to figure it out. We're going to put him in some low leverage situations for a little while, see if it gets him back into a groove. And now it's, hey, Sir Anthony might be the guy down the stretch. Or, if Sir Anthony needs to get 3 tough outs in the 8th inning, like he might be the guy there, and then maybe Kimbrell faces the lower half of the lineup in the 9th. The tone right now is not necessarily Craig Kimbrell is our closer moving forward, and that's the guy who it's going to be. Sir Anthony Dominguez has gotten the nod lately. Craig Kimbrell has yet to bounce back into form. Good to see him have a nice outing yesterday. So we'll see what happens at the back end of the bullpen. But hopefully in September as well, you get somebody like Danny Coulombe back, where he's not necessarily a go-to shutdown closer. He hasn't really profiled as that in his career. But if you get to the 9th inning, it's a 2-run game, and there's 2 lefties coming up, maybe Danny Coulombe is the guy.
Sure.
Where it's not necessarily a, hey, Craig Kimbrell is our closer moving forward. I think you have probably 4 guys that you could look at realistically as you get into September and potentially October. Sir Anthony Dominguez, Yennier Cano, Danny Coulombe. I think you can still put Kimbrell in that conversation if he is on, if he has a good stretch. I think all 4 of those guys you could look at as closing option. Maybe it's a bit of a closing by committee sort of situation.
Yeah, I agree. And I think Coulombe, you're definitely excited for. Out of the many guys you're excited to get back. Not on the pitching front, really quickly, Jordan Westberg was getting some ground balls yesterday, one-handed ones, so he was happy to be at least getting into some baseball routines. I think that one's still day-to-day in terms of how he feels, but that one would also be another huge get-back to have him in the infield again come September. Yeah,
and we're going to talk about the injuries more here as we get into our conversation of how the Orioles have been stacking up against some of the other best teams in baseball. But again, you want the Orioles to play as competitive baseball as possible, right? You would love a scenario where all of a sudden they just start to run away with the AL East. But with the amount of guys that are on the injured list, and that's nothing against the guys that are in the starting rotation. I think you could see some solid starts from Trevor Rogers and Cole Irvin down the line. They have that upside. They have that capability. Cade Povich was awesome in the start that he got called up for. 6 1/3, 2 earned, 6 Ks, no walks against the Red Sox. He was throwing strike one. He had better command than I had seen from Cade Povich all season. There are guys that can still get you to win games down the stretch. But of course, it's a different outlook once you get Zach Eflin and Grayson Rodriguez back in this rotation. And again, not going to have the conversation of what happens if Grayson and Eflin do not fall on the optimistic side of these injury comebacks here. That's a different conversation for going into October. But as of right now, there are a lot of top teams around baseball that have been playing pretty close to 500 ball. And the fact that the Orioles are still in the conversation with kind of the top 5 teams for the best record in baseball, given the injuries that they have, is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, it really goes to show how well that next man up mentality has been working, because you take a look at all the teams around the big leagues with their injured lists. The Orioles is one of the lengthiest, which hurts. Yeah. It really hurts to see when you're scrolling through that. But even then, the Dodgers have 11 on the injured list. The Orioles have 13 for perspective. The Astros, who have been doing well in the American League so far, have 15 on the injured list. So they're not alone in this venture. They're definitely towards the top end of the amount of injuries, but they're not alone. And they're not alone in losing in the month of August specifically, too. I mean, the Yankees lost 3 games in a row with the 2 to the Tigers, then 1 to the Guardians. The Dodgers lost 2 of 4 to the Brewers, lost 2 of 3 to the Phillies. Yes, those are 2 really great teams, but then lost to the A's, something that the Orioles have done in 1 game. The Brewers split a series with the Dodgers and then lost 2 of 3 to the Nats. So it's definitely a common theme. And just to put it into perspective for Orioles fans, they're not alone in the fact that they've been losing in August. They're definitely not the only team in the American League who's around the 8-9 record in the month of August. Yankees are 8-8. Red Sox are 9-9 this month. They've been creeping up in the American League East, but still have those losses too.
Yeah, and again, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today, which was the fact that, yes, it's easy to look at just the Orioles on a game-to-game basis and feel like they have not been playing their best baseball. That is apparent, right? They got off to a really hot start. The last month and a half or so, it has not been the Orioles that we are accustomed to seeing. But if you're zooming out and you're looking at the broad context of the league, the Orioles are a game back of the best record in baseball. I know it doesn't feel that way, but there is really not a team in baseball that is completely running away with things right now, which makes for, fun once we get to October and stuff like that. But I understand that it's frustrating when you're looking at the Orioles knowing that they're not necessarily playing their best baseball, but you've got to zoom out in the broader context of the league, because the Orioles are tied for the best record in the American League. And I know that doesn't really help on a game-to-game basis when you may not be happy with how the team is playing day in and day out. You want to see different things, whatever, but there's no team in baseball that is pulling away right now. It's not just the Orioles that have struggled a little bit in the second half. In this second half, the Orioles are 16-15. The Yankees, the team that they are competing for the top of the AL East with, are 15-13. So slightly better, but they've played fewer games. The Guardians in the second half are 500. They are 15-15. You want to talk about a team that's been struggling? The Phillies in the second half are 11-18. Really the only team within the top 5 or 6 record that has been succeeding in the second half. The Dodgers are 19-11. The Brewers have been coming on lately. They've got a top 5 record in baseball now. They've been solid in the second half as well. But in the American League, the top 3 teams, the Yankees, the Orioles, the Guardians, all 3 of those teams have yet to make any sort of ground over the other in the American League.
Yeah, and it also kind of goes back to the conversation we had last week where you when you zoom out, like you said, I like that phrase that you used, but you zoom out and all the Orioles have been doing is using depth and using what they can to tread water. When it comes to September, the time you really want to make that push, if there was ever a good time to get players back, it is September to make that push. And you're treading water and staying right in contention for the best record in all of baseball while treading water when the other teams might not necessarily be having to do that as much. This is a good sign almost if you take a look at September upcoming, where you might not necessarily have to be treading water then, and then you can really make that push with a new and improved kind of almost rebuilding team by then.
Right, and it's a good point because the Orioles, if you were looking at what's been happening over the last few weeks, it's a lot of, okay, this guy went down, here's somebody to replace them. This guy went down, here's somebody to replace them. These other top teams in baseball don't have that to the same extent. I mean, you could make an argument for the Dodgers. If you were looking at other teams around baseball that have really been hit by injuries, the Dodgers are a big one. They've got on the 60-day injury list Connor Brogdon, Tony Gonsolin, Dustin May, River Ryan, Emmett Sheehan, and Yamamoto. Those are some big names there, especially in the bullpen. And then Yamamoto, Tony Gonsolin in the starting rotation. Their 15 to 10-day IL right now has Tyler Glasnow, Bruce Stark-Gratterall, Blake Trinan, Austin Barnes, and Chris Taylor. So Austin Barnes, Chris Taylor, solid position players, Taylor especially. Their starting rotation has been hit really hard. Glasnow, Yamamoto, that hurts. I mean, Walker Buehler was out for a lot of the season. Dustin May and Tony Gonsolin have been out a majority of the year. So the Dodgers have had to push through similar injury concerns as well. Mookie Betts was just off the injured list. He missed a big chunk of time. So that's really the only other top team that you can look at and say they have a comparable injured list. But let's just talk about the other teams in the American League, the Yankees and the Guardians. If you want to say the Orioles have been struggling at the plate in the second half, they still have the 6th best OPS in baseball in the second half of the season with a 789. The Yankees are in second with an 831 because they have probably the 2 best hitters on the planet in Aaron Judge and Juan Soto. That tends to help with the OPS numbers. The Guardians in the second half are 28th in baseball in OPS with a 656. That's a team who added hitters at the trade deadline. Talk about somebody like Lane Thomas, who has really, really struggled in Cleveland since he got traded. 28th in baseball in OPS are the Cleveland Guardians. You want to talk about second half ERA? Post All-Star break, yes, the Orioles have struggled. They are 24th in baseball with a 4.71 ERA after the All-Star break. I think I can point to the 8 players on the injured list as a reason that might be the case. I know Tyler Wells and Kyle Bradish and John Means got injured earlier in the season, but again, you are now without Eflin, you are without Grayson Rodriguez, you're without Coulomb, you're without Jacob Webb. The Guardians are 11th in baseball with a 3.76 because they have an incredible bullpen. That is why they have the 11th best ERA in baseball after the All-Star break. The Yankees are 25th with a 4.73 ERA, and that is including a second half that has had all of Garrett Cole. If you wanted to talk about the Yankees starting rotation at the beginning of the season and why they might have been struggling, it's because they didn't have Garrett Cole. They're still bad. 25th in baseball after the All-Star break. The Guardians have, again, that top ERA because of their bullpen, but the other 4 teams, the Dodgers, the Phillies, the Orioles, the Yankees, have a bottom half bullpen ERA in the second half. Yes, the Orioles bullpen has been struggling after the break. They are far from the only top team whose bullpen has struggled. Same thing with the starting rotation. The Dodgers are towards the top half of the league in their starting pitching ERA, which again is admirable, given the fact that there are injuries to Yamamoto and Glasnow. The other 4 teams, Guardians, Phillies, Orioles, Yankees, pretty middle of the pack in starting pitching ERA after the All-Star break. So it's not just Baltimore, I promise.
Yeah, and it does hurt because you look at the injured list, and for the Orioles, 98% of them are difference makers.
Right.
Throughout the season. It's not like, okay, they have a packed injured list, but a few of them or a handful of them probably wouldn't get playing time anyways. That's not the case because they are almost all difference makers. But that also is somewhat good news because you have a handful of them who are coming back in September to be able to make that difference. You mentioned OPS. I did want to throw in the Ramon Arias stat, as we usually do every week.
Yeah.
In his last 10 games, he has a over 1,100 OPS in the last 10 games. That's just a really great sign to be moving forward for the Orioles, despite all the injuries, and especially with Jordan Westberg out in the infield. You still have someone who's kind of taking that offense to another level for the O's.
Yeah, and we've been talking at length about the pitching injuries because you kind of have to with 8 pitchers on the injured list. But Jorge Mateo is on the 60-day injured list. I know Jackson Holliday was eventually going to take over this everyday second base job, and Jorge Mateo may have just turned into, a utility defensive replacement, pinch runner, whatever it may be. But Jorge Mateo was your starting second baseman oftentimes. I'm sure if he's still on this team, he's probably getting a good amount of starts at second base against left-handed pitching. That's not an insignificant guy to be missing. Jordan Westburg on the 15-day injured list. So is Heston Kjerstad. I know Kjerstad was back and forth between AAA Norfolk and the majors. That's still a really solid left-handed bat that the Orioles don't have at this point. I don't know if there would have been a roster spot on the 26 for Heston Kjerstad, but that's still a really solid option to have. Kobe Mayo isn't even on this roster right now. That's another guy that you could look at as a potential replacement. Other teams around baseball are just not getting hit like that. Yeah, look at the Yankees. Their 60-day injured list includes JT Brubaker, Jonathan Loaizaga, Cody Poteet, Clark Schmidt, Lou Trevino. That's a solid amount of bullpen arms that the Yankees miss. Outside of that, it's John Birdie, Anthony Rizzo that are on shorter-term injuries. Rizzo has been out for a while, but is expected to be back at some point relatively soon. Jazz Chisholm on the injured list short-term as well. Those are 2 significant bats. I don't think either of them make the significance of an all-star third baseman in Jordan Westburg. And outside of Clark Schmidt, the Yankees haven't really been hit in the starting rotation injury-wise. The Guardians, their 60-day, Shane Bieber, James Karinchak. That's 2 important names. Shane Bieber, a great starting pitcher. Karinchak, a great reliever. Outside of that, 15-day injured list has Carlos Carrasco and Alex Cobb, 2 veteran starting pitchers. Carrasco has been having a tough season. Alex Cobb, a guy you would like to have in your starting rotation. It's kind of it. There are some other bullpen names thrown in, but the injured list just, I'm not trying to just say that the Orioles get a free pass here because of the injuries, but other teams around baseball are struggling because they're struggling.
Yeah.
And sure, there have been some slow stretches from Orioles players recently, right? Like Gunnar Henderson and Adley Rutschman went through their cold slumps. We have seen a power downtick from guys like Ryan Mountcastle and Ryan O'Hearn. Sure, those guys could be playing better, and hopefully they will be playing better down the stretch. But you can point to the injuries and say, man, this feels like a much different baseball team in a month, whereas the Yankees and Guardians in the American League, even the Dodgers and Phillies, you can look at and say, okay, they're just kind of struggling because they're struggling.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily just because of the injuries.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it, that the Orioles' biggest issue is injuries this season, and other teams can't really use that to describe their issues.
Right.
And I will say that it does hurt, especially with the Zach Eflin injury, no matter how long it might or short it might be, but it does hurt because this is a guy you had gotten at the trade deadline to be able to make that push and resolve some of these other starting pitcher injuries since the early parts of the season, and you had hoped for him to be that playoff number 3, and he still could be, given the hope that Brandon Hyde has so far. And so we're still expecting details on that to come, and we'll see just how short his injury or his IL stint could be. But it does hurt when you think about how he was grabbed at the trade deadline to be able to kind of fulfill and round out the rotation with all the injuries already. But again, there's nothing you can do about it. The Orioles are doing their best right now, and very well, I would add, with Kramer and Suarez and Povich. I'm excited for him to get some more opportunities because it does kind of seem like he's feeling more comfortable and wanting to prove himself more. And I think that he's still young. I feel like people forget about that. I don't know. Yeah. It's just kind of, there's hope.
Yeah. And again, in this conversation, you have to remember that the Orioles are tied for the best record in the American League. We could get through this tough stretch the last month and a half. Look at what the Orioles have in September. There are some very winnable series. Look at the last series in August. You're at Colorado. Then you have a 3-game series at home against the White Sox, followed by a 3-game series at home against the Rays. That's 3 straight series that feel very, very winnable. Then you go at Boston against the Red Sox, who are always tough. It's a division rival, sure. But then you've got 3 games at the Tigers, then home against the Giants, home against the Tigers again. That's a solid stretch of a lot of winnable series there. And if you're going to point to one series where you say, man, I really hope Zach Eflin and Grayson Rodriguez are back by then, September 24th at New York against the Yankees for a 3-game series that could very well decide the AL East if there's not more than 3-4 games of separation by then. And then you end the season with a 3-game series in Minnesota against the Twins to round out September. So fingers crossed. You've got Grayson Rodriguez and Zach Eflin for those final 6 games of the year against the Yankees and Twins. But end of August and into early September and even mid-September, that's a lot of winnable series.
Yeah, that's a really good thing to bring up, because if it had been the schedule that they had in the end of June or kind of middle of June into July, where it was Braves, Phillies, Yankees, Astros, Guardians, Rangers, like that is something, if they had that schedule implanted into end of August into September, then I'd be way more worried than I am now. And you are glad that they have the schedule that you just brought up in end of August.
Yeah, and again, this team has the potential to look very, very different. You hate to just look down the stretch in September and say, this is what we're playing for. Like, you want to stay afloat until the guys get back. But you're talking about getting back Jordan Westberg, who is an all-star third baseman, Heston Kjerstad, who, again, I'm not exactly sure what Kjerstad's role is going to look like on this 26-man roster, but that's still a solid option for both of those guys to potentially come off the injured list and be big contributors. And then, of course, pitching-wise, Zach Eflin and Grayson Rodriguez in the starting rotation, Jacob Webb, Danny Coulombe in the bullpen. That's a very, very, very different team. And if that is the team that you were rolling out in late September, October, like this team as currently constructed is still tied for the best record in the American League. It's still a darn good team. And then you're getting back an all-star, 2 starting pitchers who have all-star capability. Like, they are putting up all-star type of numbers in Baltimore this season. Danny Coulombe has been excellent. Jacob Webb is a solid bullpen option. We've joked about it before, but that almost feels like a late September trade deadline where the team just got a heck of a lot better going into a playoff stretch.
Yeah, not to mention Heston Kjerstad, who has just like such an incredible raw power.
Yeah.
And that bat would be an incredible boost and help for that late September push as well. So someone asked on YouTube when Danny Coulombe's expected back. It says right now September 15th. So crossing fingers for that middle, early September welcome home.
Yeah, Danny Coulombe, Jordan Westberg are kind of in the same sphere of, like, we know what the injury is. The timeline is hopefully somewhere in September, but you're not going to push them. The priority is getting them back and getting them ready for the playoffs. And, you know, hopefully if there's a week at the end of the regular season that is going to determine the AL East, hopefully those 2 guys are healthy by then. Zach Eflin and Grayson Rodriguez are more in the camp of, we're hoping this is a shorter-term thing. Grayson Rodriguez, Mike Elias said that they were going to take a few weeks, get more imaging. With him, Zach Eflin, this is still a very fresh injury for him. And Brandon Hyde said that he has felt better over the last few days, but just didn't feel right after his last start. So we're not really in the stage of we know what the injury is, and we have a pretty good idea of when he might be back, assuming that, you know, he makes whatever rehab starts, whatever it may be. We're still kind of at the point with both of those guys, which is a little bit nerve-wracking, where it's, we're going to reevaluate in a few weeks, and we think it's going to be a short-term thing, but also if it's not, I'm going to be sad.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we're at with them.
Yeah. Someone's comment, we have an all-star rotation on the IL. That is
we do.
Very true.
Again, Zach Eflin, Grayson Rodriguez, Kyle Bradish, John Means, Tyler Wells. If that is your 5-man starting rotation for an entire season.
It would have been too mean to the rest of the league for that.
I guess so. I think back to
The baseball gods.
the now cursed graphic that I made when we did I think it was our spring training report in the
Yeah.
offseason after
all
the
your
Orioles
fault.
traded for Corbin Burns. I distinctly remember doing a show literally at this desk with Rock Kabako where we pulled up a graphic and said potential Orioles starting rotation for the 2024 season. And it was Corbin Burns, Grayson Rodriguez, Kyle Bradish, John Means, Tyler Wells.
So basically, it's all your fault.
It is my fault.
It's all Brendan
I take
Mortensen's
full
fault.
responsibility for all of these injuries happening. It's on me.
Can't blame Brandon Hyde. I'll just put that out there. But you can blame Brandon.
all of Twitter would tend to disagree with
Yeah,
you
for sure.
because apparently a bunch of people who have never been in the clubhouse have now noticed that Brandon Hyde has lost the clubhouse, which, by the way, is not true. But anyway,
That's another story.
that's a story for another podcast. But I think that'll just about wrap things up for this week's edition of the Bird's Nest. Thank you so much for following along
Praying
with
for
us
good news
here
next
live. Oh my God, we can't talk about another starting pitcher injury next week. We can't,
We'll just boycott.
right?
We'll
I mean, there's no way.
boycott.
We might not do a podcast if there's another starting pitcher
We'll
injury.
mourn.
Because and now this might just be our fault, where we keep saying, wow, there can't be another one. But
Yeah.
maybe there will be. Who knows?
Canceling the pod.
Yeah, but thank you for following along with us live on YouTube and Facebook. We love reading your comments and answering your questions. We are live every Wednesday at 11 a.m. on YouTube and Facebook, or you can catch us after the fact on Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts or your digital shows, you can find us here on the Bird's Nest. Big thank you to Amy Jennings behind the scenes for producing this one and pushing through some technical difficulties with it. Wouldn't be the Bird's Nest if we didn't have something funny going on. So big thank you to Amy. For Annie Klaff, I'm Brendan Mortensen, and we'll catch you next time.